This is what we visualize in our heads when we listen to a song. We've got the x-axis, which represents how left or right a sound appears to our brain. Then we've got the y-axis, which represents how low or high a sound sounds to our brain. Then we've got the z-axis, which represents how forward or back a sound sounds to us. Then finally, we also have the size of a sound, which represents how big or small a sound is to our ears. I came across a video about 10 years ago talking about how our brains paint a 3D image of the song that we're listening to, and it completely changed how I listen to music. It allowed me to become more fully immersed in each song as I became aware of the picture that my brain was drawing as I was listening. So today I want to dive deep into the 3 dimensions our brains visualize when we listen to a song and show what these mental images typically look like across different genres. So first we got the x-axis, or the horizontal space, which is simply how left or right a sound is. So using modern day music software, songs are able to kind of place a sound anywhere, whether it's like far left, far right, or right down the middle. Usually what happens on a song is that the most prominent instruments will get placed right down the middle. So instruments like vocals, drums, bass, maybe piano, the instruments that really drive a song. And then the supporting instruments will get placed to the sides, like guitars, violins, and just any other supporting instruments depending on the genre of music. Taking the song Birds of a Feather by Billie Eilish as an example, here's where all the instruments will be on the horizontal space and sound like. We kind of got everything jammed up in the middle, except for the acoustic guitar and hi-hats to the left. Now that's actually an overly simplified visualization of Birds of a Feather. Again, our brain sees more complete 3D images of each song. So I want to bring the y-axis now, or the vertical space, so at least we can see a good 2D image, or like a square painting, versus just all the sounds spread out across one flat line. So typically, a bass sounds lower, so it's usually perceived to be lower within that imagined 3D space, while a trumpet typically, for example, sounds higher, so it's perceived to be higher within that kind of imagined 3D image in our heads. So on a typical pop song today, the lower instruments tend to be bass and kick drum, and in the middle we'll get like vocals, and then main instruments like guitars, piano, and then finally on the upper third we'll get supporting instruments like maybe any synthesizer sounds, or supporting drum sounds like hi-hats and cowbells. Having understood how the X and Y axes work, here's where all the instruments will be more accurately on Birds of a Feather. We've got vocals right down the middle, then slightly below, the kick snare drums, then bass a bit further down in the middle. Then we also got the main bell sound floating up on top, but still in the middle. We also got a spacey synth overlapping with the vocals in the middle. Finally, we got an acoustic guitar to one side on the bottom, and then hi-hats to one side as well, but floating on top. Birds of a Feather is such a simple yet infectious and beautiful song, even just looking at this image. And I actually made a video talking about why Birds of a Feather sounds so complex and catchy, even though the riff is actually so simple and repetitive. So check it out if you're interested. Now, we're not done yet. So far we got a nice 2D image, but again, our brains hear songs in 3D, so there's depth to each sound and instrument that our brain's hearing too. If we notice on the visualizations I've been showing so far, some sounds sound more forward or back than others. Sounds like backing vocals with more effects like reverb or delay effects tend to sound like they're more back, while sounds with less effects, like my speaking voice right now, tend to sound like they're more forward. So in a standard pop song, typically the lead vocals would sound the most close or forward, and then behind the lead vocals we get lead instruments like piano, guitars, drums, bass, and further back behind those instruments we get supporting instrument sounds like any synth sounds. Of course, this varies greatly by genre. Now, listening through Birds of a Feather again, here's how all the different instrument sounds would stack up against each other. On the forefront, we see that the lead vocals and drums seem to be the closest. Then behind them, we got the acoustic guitar and bass. Then further back, the hi-hat, main bell sound, and spacey synth. Finally, one thing we haven't talked about is the size of each sound. Our brains perceive each sound to be of a certain size within this kind of mental 3D image it paints, some bigger and some smaller than the others. So typically sounds that are louder tend to sound bigger to our brains, and then sounds that are quieter tend to sound smaller to our brains. But loudness is not the only thing that determines how big or small a sound sounds. For example, backing vocals, even though they're supposed to be backing vocals, especially on a song like Birds of a Feather, they tend to sound rather big.
Birds of a feather, we should stick together, I know.
On Birds of a Feather, the spacey synth, bass, drums, and vocals sound the biggest, while the supporting acoustic guitar and bell sound smaller, the hi-hats too, which is pretty typical. Now, it might seem like the end goal for each song is to sound like super well balanced and paint like a really well-rounded and just beautiful image, but it's not really true. It depends on kind of the genre and style that we're going for. For example, in rap and hip-hop, the bass and drums sound super big, almost masking the lead vocals, and this middle bottom section just becomes super overcrowded.
Hey Drake, I hear you like I'm young. You better not ever go to Cell Block.
Since the main point of hip-hop is for the rapper to rap over the beat, the drums and bass, the lead instruments that drive that beat, get turned up like a lot so that it's easier for the rapper to feel the rhythm and create stuff over. The way I like to picture rap music is like a dark alley, since the drums and bass, both kind of occupying the lower frequencies and lower part of the painting, stand out so much. While in classical music, it's just overcrowded all over the place with sometimes over 100 instruments, since they record like 4 orchestras sometimes. As an image, it's complete chaos. We got everything stacked up against another everywhere. It becomes really hard to identify where a singular instrument is coming from. When I listen to classical music, and especially orchestral classical music, I picture like a golden European palace with like super tall ceilings, and it's as if they just really want to show off all the jewelries they got in the house. On the other hand, we got folk music, which a lot of times is just the guitar and vocals, which feels like a pretty bland image, but it sounds pretty good sometimes regardless.
Oh, the times they are a-changing.
In folk music, the focus is on the lyrics being sung, so the only instrument we got right down the middle is the lead vocals, and then we got a guitar slightly off-centered to show that it's merely supporting. Not to mention, guitars are typically kind of turned down a little bit too, appearing even smaller, making even more room for the vocals. When I listen to folk music, I like to kind of picture myself, or picture a guy kind of in a tiny college dorm room, just reflecting and vibing. It's a comfortable place to be in at night after a long day outside. As we sing, our brains paint 3D moving images of each song that we're listening to, and depending on the style and genre of music, the image can range from like a super simplistic countryside view, like on folk music, or a super grand European palace, like on classical music. And becoming aware of the image our brains painting can really help us connect with and appreciate the music that we love. If you're interested in learning more about how different genres of music make us feel and why, check out this video where I go through the most popular chord progressions of the last 7 decades in pop music. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.